Hello, everyone. Welcome to Voices, our weekly show on Radio Zindagi, brought to you by Radio Zindagi, for the community and by the community. I'm Rennu Dhillon from Genius Kids. I love hosting the show. This is a favorite part of my week. So I'll begin by thanking RJ Era, of course, Neeraj and Saba for giving us this opportunity to always address very critical issues that are affecting all of us, especially now during the COVID times. And today we have another very important topic to talk about, something that's very close to my heart. We're going to be talking about domestic violence. And we have an amazing group of panelists with us today that are going to be sharing their views and giving us some ideas of how we can address this issue. So let's talk about domestic violence. Domestic violence, when anyone hears this word, they normally just think of physical abuse. And in actual fact, domestic violence goes beyond just the physical abuse, believe it or not. The definition of domestic violence is it's a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain control over the other. And this includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse, dating abuse, psychological abuse, threats, stalking, and now even cyber stalking. And victims can include, but not be limited to, spouses or your partners or even family members and children or co-inhabitants. So believe it or not, friends, during these COVID-19 situations where the lockdown required people to be confined to the house, you're basically locking down the victim with the abuser. And thank God I am out of that marriage that I was in many years ago. God bless you, Deep, for passing away on me. But anyway, I'm so glad, because had that happened to me and I had to be locked down with him during COVID, I probably wouldn't be sitting in this radio show. Believe it or not, in just United Kingdom, during the COVID times, the calls increased by 97%, emails by 185%, and visits to the websites, to domestic violence websites, by 581%. I mean, that's just in the United Kingdom. Americans, of course, we're also being affected in the same way, including children. So that's the reason why we brought on a group of excellent panelists to share their views and also how we can help solve this issue. So let's begin with this wonderful group of ladies today. I call this Superwoman Power. Begin with Sonya Pillai. Sonia is a marketing executive with a passion for building tech startups. She's a passionate feminist since the age of 13. She's a leader, board member, and president of the award-winning nonprofit Maitri. So welcome, Sonia.
Thank you, Rennu, for doing this as always.
And then, of course, we have Bindu. Bindu Fernandes is the executive director at Narika, a 28-year-old. Oh, why did I have to say that? You make me feel so old, Bindu. 28-year-old, culturally and trauma-responsive nonprofit that offers free advocacy and supports programs for survivors of domestic violence and abuse. Bindu is dedicated to celebrating the various cultural and other identities of those that serve and ensure no survivors left behind in their quest for safety and wellness. And she can be reached at bindu@narika.org. So welcome, Bindu.
Thank you.
28 years. Congratulations to Narika.
Just so everyone knows, it's not me that's 28.
Yes.
It's the organization.
Yeah. You know what? You could pass to the 28-year-old, but 28-year-old, that's amazing. Then, of course, we move on to Shailaja Dixit. She's a trained domestic violence advocate, currently working as a community engagement specialist with SAVE. She's passionate about women's rights, human rights, and social justice. Shailaja earned her master's in mass communication from the University of Florida, and in her spare time, she loves to read books and attend local theater. She strongly believes that no one is free until everyone is free. And then last but not least, we have with us Kalpana Peddibhotla. She's an immigration attorney and practices immigration and nationality law exclusively. She has represented numerous companies on their business immigration matters. She successfully guided Silicon Valley companies from inception to exit. She's taught business immigration. She's been featured on radio and news programs and has been invited as a speaker at the, AILA conference? Strong advocate of women's rights and strong voice against domestic violence. So welcome, Shailaja, welcome, Kalpana, welcome all the wonderful ladies.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I know this is a very sensitive, touchy topic, and especially for women like us who are so passionate about this. So I'm going to begin with my first question, of course, to you, Sonia. I did address the different types of domestic violence, but wanted you to maybe expand on that. We know that domestic violence is not just limited to physical abuse. So can you address some of the others that you have been dealing with?
Absolutely. And I also want to bring in what has happened during the pandemic, which has been a very unique situation, especially for immigrant women. So we see a lot of financial control. We see a lot of immigration control, which is not true in the mainstream, the immigration part, but it's true for any immigrant community. In fact, I remember one activist telling us a long time ago, it's not the green card, but the green club, right? The threat of canceling your immigration status, not having your immigration documents with you, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for immigrant communities, there are some special nuances which don't happen if you are in the mainstream. For example, your social networks are back in the home countries. So you may be even more severely isolated than somebody who is born and raised in here. You don't know the laws here. So a lot of them, women, when they come here and they're being abused, they're isolated. And so anything that the abuser tells them, they have to take it at face value. So the laws, knowing how to navigate and live in a new culture, in a new community, these are huge challenges that can be very restrictive for people. How to learn how to open a bank account, take a bus. These are things we take for granted when we are assimilated, when we've lived somewhere. Mm-hmm. So besides all of the ones you mentioned, we also have something which is abused by the extended family, which is very prevalent in the Desi communities or very patriarchal societies. And it's a little difficult where if you come here and you're living in a joint family, the abuse could be happening from the father-in-law, the mother-in-law, perhaps the brother-in-law, not just the spouse, or perhaps the spouse is not participating in it actively, right? And trying to explain this to mainstream caregivers is very difficult. And the pandemic now, it's shown us that financial homelessness, financial issues, and our call volume from new clients has dropped drastically because they're sheltering in place with the abuser. However, the call volume from existing clients who are already out of the situation has skyrocketed. And we are seeing extraordinary amounts of job loss. Pretty much all of our clients have lost jobs. We are seeing a lot of homelessness beginning to happen. So there's a huge scramble if you think of it, that you've left the situation thinking you were going to build a new life. And now you've been put into this vice of homelessness, poverty, loss of a job. It's really a dreadful, really, I cannot tell you how challenging the situation right now is.
Thank you for that. Yes, it is. And you brought back a lot of thoughts into my mind, because I do remember in my own personal situation coming from Kenya, I was completely unaware of the laws. I mean, at least now we have social media where you can type in, immigration attorney and somebody will come up. In my time, it was the yellow pages and we're very restricted to that. And I lived in fear of losing my green card because I was told that if you have a report on me, you're just not going to have a green card. So yeah, it is pretty scary. And I think a lot of the mainstream never understand sometimes the Desi mentality that we go through. So my next question is to you, Bindu. How do you recognize domestic violence? Because, many people who are being abused will try and hide it as much as possible when they go outside. What are the signs that you've seen in your experience with Narika?
Yeah, I would say, I think general, a lot of fear, a fear of speaking out, a fear of reaching out to friends and family. Of course, one of the trademark perspectives on domestic violence is just the isolation that is created by the person causing harm. And so the response to that often is fear and intimidation and like just to reach out. So I think if as an ally, if you notice that your friends or your siblings are starting really to be afraid to speak or fearful or unduly anxious, like those are all warning signs to think about. I do think a general loss of confidence, self-worth, these are all very integral, seemingly like wishy-washy topics, but really when someone's self-worth and confidence has been systematically hit time and time again by the person causing harm, these are all kind of flagged as an outside person to recognize that, hey, what's going on? Is there something larger? Of course, physical abuse, unexplained bruises, unexplained, well, I fell down the stairs multiple times. All of these things are really important and telling. Maybe they might be planning to leave. And so questions around, well, how do I really know what visa status I'm on? How do I get access to my bank accounts? These are all really interesting ways to kind of maybe identify that someone might be thinking about leaving and therefore really take a step in the right direction, help. But I will also say the underlying theme here is that it is a extremely fragile conversation to say that you are a survivor, and it has to be met with belief and love and non-judgment. And we hear from many of our clients that the first person they said something to, whether it was a friend or a family member, often responds with questions or denial or shaming or slap on some lipstick, life will be okay, or have a baby, things are going to be fine. And it's important as a community that we really think about what is our first response when someone says something, and it may seem like just a toxic relationship. And so we've all seen our share of that, but how do we meet that response from a friend? Because those are very fragile moments that someone seeks out and asks for help, and it has to be met with love and non-judgment.
And probably a lot of our movies depict the wrong response. And very common with Punjabis is to hear, "Koi na, everything will, he will change or she will change, he, of course, being the most prominent. Koi na, he will change, or things happen, just learn to live with him. After all, this is your destiny."
Absolutely.
And I would strongly recommend that that's not your destiny. Anyone that thinks this is your destiny, please stop going to astrologers to find out if that is really your destiny or not. That was my mom's response to my situation. Go to an astrologer. No, Mom, we don't do that. My next question is to Shailaja. I try to add a little bit of humor to a very serious topic. My next question, Shailaja, is, of course, we know that there's a lot of hesitancy that victims have in reporting domestic violence and reaching out for help. Other than what Bindu has said, what have you found out in your experience of being an advocate for this? Why do people hesitate to talk about it?
So I'm going to separate reporting, which is more law enforcement, to somebody reaching out for help, and talking from a survivor's perspective based on what I've seen, heard, and worked with. It's not only about leaving the situation. A survivor is actually dealing with many levels of oppression when they are thinking about how to process what they're experiencing. So if I were to put a framework to it, there is the ideological, where we have these ideal situations of how things should work. How does the marriage look? What is a perfect wife? What's a perfect family? And then there is the institutional. What does a marriage look like? What does patriarchy ask you to do? I mean, these are all things that are ingrained in us as we are growing up, which impact how we process, receive, and respond to an unhealthy situation when it comes to us. The most powerful and the one that we talk about the most often is the interpersonal, of course, the actual abuser, the family. What have you been told, as Bindu was talking about, what's the first response from people when you broke the silence? Everybody is very eager to say, break the silence, but what happens to you when you break the silence? Are you met with somebody who validates and supports and believes, or are you told, as you were saying, Rennu, how does it matter? Put on some lipstick, get on with it, such is life. And then I think there is the aspect that we don't see very often, but it's there. It's the internalized stories. So what has the person internalized about themselves? So that loss of confidence, or the stories they are telling themselves, or the voice inside your head that does not allow you to believe or even receive the resources. So it's almost like, it's not just about walking out of a situation. It is really, there is a whole journey to be made. It's one layer after the other. And your victimization does not stop at walking out on your abuser. It is the systems, it's the processes you have to go through. It's a long journey. So the hesitation, I would say, if I were to say what stops somebody, yes, it's fear. It's fear for their safety first and foremost. It's fear for for what's life's gonna look like. And it's also the fear if someone's gonna believe me. So that's the biggest thing that all of us as community can change right away, is to start believing survivors and not questioning them. Because we all know that perpetrators are charming outside. It's very hard to believe, like, that person really, so.
No, absolutely. And I think it's so important. One of the big concerns as well that I've heard many, many times is, of course, a financial reason when the
Yes.
victim has been suppressed finances, why sometimes they don't even have a bank account and they worry about where am I going to go? I won't have any
Yes.
money. And,
Yes.
how
And
am I
that's
going to do this?
exactly the safety of what my life's going to look like. However, sometimes finances may even be present. You just do not believe that you have the confidence and competence to apply
Correct.
them. So, yeah.
So my question to you, Kalpana, is where were you when I needed you many years ago? But my question is, I'm not sure about what was going on at that time because I didn't know who to call, but I was always told that your green card is conditional. And if you try and report me in, I'm going to cancel your green card and then you're going to go back and I'm not giving you the kids.
Right.
What are the immigration law options for domestic violence victims? Hopefully they've changed, but what are the laws?
Well, thank you first off for having the conversation and inviting me. And I just wanted to acknowledge that Narika, Maitri, and SAVE are fantastic organizations that I've had the honor to work with them as well as many of their clients. I think one of the things that I wanted to step back a little bit, and that is the notion that nothing can be done. And that's a commonly held notion that, in fact, that if you raise your voice, something bad can happen to you, such as the threat of deportation, which you're mentioning, and the notion that this person controls your life. And that's simply not true. That's not true under our laws. And in fact, what's very critical is many times people think, well, this is an issue just between husband and wife. And as a community, we think sometimes, this is an issue between husband and wife. Well, that's not what our law says. So in fact, if somebody is, abusing their spouse, it's not the survivor that is prosecuting that individual. It's the state on behalf of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And that principle is critical to understanding that we in this society have determined that these crimes go beyond that household because they have a detrimental impact on our children and on our communities, and we will not tolerate them. So it's not that the survivor is like, she sent me to jail. No, your actions sent you to jail.
Mm-hmm.
Our government prosecuted you for your actions. So I think it's very critical first just to step back and understand that somebody's not at fault for what another person does to them. And then and we have determined as a society that we will indeed prosecute them. I'd like to say to your listeners, though, we can be doing a better job. There are light sentences. There are horrible, highly publicized crimes that have occurred. And the sentences are unbelievably ridiculous. So one of the things we can do and ask your listeners to do is to talk about that. Why are we letting, perpetrators of domestic violence off on, simple disturbing the police, the peace? Why does that happen? And start to demand that there are more just sentences and that there is real prosecution. But getting back to your point about immigration, there's absolutely support. One of the things that we have is a law under the Violence Against Women's Act. That's the starting place for where many protections have unfolded. The first protections came, though, initially just to permanent residents. Or the spouses of permanent residents and U.S. citizens, even those who have not yet obtained their green cards. So when your ex-husband had held that over your head, the Violence Against Women's Act would protect you from that. There is a pathway towards the green card that's independent from that abusive spouse. There's newer protections that have arrived, that have come out of that law, really starting in year 2000, but unfortunately it wasn't implemented for almost a decade later. And that is something called a U visa. Maybe some folks have heard about this, and a T visa for victims of the U visa for victims of certain crimes, including domestic violence, and the T visa for victims of trafficking. And these visas provide a critical answer for those people who are not married to permanent residents, and with huge backlogs, especially in the Indian community, people are not getting their green cards anytime soon. And so they are married in relationships where the primary is on an H-1B and the dependent is reliant upon them on their H-4. And the U visa does provide an independent vehicle towards the green card. That also affords other protections such that they are protected from domestic violence. A lot of times, I think one confusing thing is, well, you can only get the U visa if you call the police. You can only get the U visa if you file a police report. That is actually not true. You can still get the U visa through other methods because you need a certifying official who has investigated the crime. So that can be a family court judge, right? So that's then, and I've actually helped not only educate our family court judges that they can do this, but our clients and family law attorneys that this is a method of relief. I have a lot of technical stuff I can get into, so I don't want to, get into it too quickly. But there are methods through that, and I want to mention one more critical one, and that is the VAWA EAD, the Violence Against Women's Act Employment Authorization Document. This was something that existed in the original laws, but only recently has been have we had regulations. And what this does, it gives women independent work authorization, not necessarily status, but independent work authorization that allows them to step out of those abusive households and take charge of their lives. And it is a critical thing. It does it does not require a police report. So I want that message to be heard because so many times they get ready to call the police and their friends or family are like, well, you either call the police or there's nothing that can be done for you. And that's just actually not true. And maybe they need more time to call the police and maybe they need more time to report it. And these other legal vehicles will give them that additional time for them to kind of think more clearly about what they want to do.
Thank you for that. Kalpana, your voice is fading in and out. You may want to just check. Yeah. But thank you so much. It was very useful. And hopefully everyone out there is listening. And for those who've just tuned in, you're listening to Voices, which is brought to you every Thursday by Radio Zindagi. And today's topic is domestic violence. And I would love to see more participation from the listeners today. You guys have been so active for all our other topics on nepotism and bullying and all the, when we had talked about film stars, all of you were sending in all your thoughts. Believe it or not, friends and listeners of Radio Zindagi, domestic violence is probably more important than Bollywood to me right now. And this is something that we have to address. And let me give you one statistic. Just in the United Kingdom, in the first 3 weeks of COVID-19 lockdowns, 14 women and 2 children were killed in the country because of domestic violence. That should just show you how critical that is. The reason why I pulled up United Kingdom stats is because I used to live there. But my question now will go back to bringing the cases that are on the rise in the United States to Sonia. Sonia, why do you think domestic violence cases are on the rise here in a country where we are meant to be educated and advanced, and everybody here is meant to be working and doing well, especially in the Silicon Valley? Why?
I think, when you really look fundamentally at culture, society, the patriarchy, there is a system of somebody has more power than the other power. And so many research studies have shown that violence is a learned behavior. I'm not talking about narcissists and I'm not talking about sociopaths or psychopaths, but I'm really talking about people who see perhaps their father hitting their mother, their grandfather hitting their grandmother, the daughters being treated differently. And so it's okay. And what you said, Rennu, was that it's okay. People say, what's the big deal? And I know I still encounter, and I'm sure Shailaja does, and so does Kalpana and everyone else in this field, that people say, what's the big deal? It was only one thappad. And there was that movie, right? Eki thappad mara, right? And there was so much discussion about it, saying, why does she make such a big deal? And why didn't she say something before, et cetera, et cetera. I think when you really consider the patriarchy where the power is exercised by one group over the other group, it's fundamentally, they don't see anything wrong with it. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you a really interesting one when somebody was saying, when we were talking about why are people scared, or what is the cultural response. Do you remember that maybe 15 years ago, this young woman named Rosie was shot by her husband, in front of the realtor, and then he went and barricaded himself in the house. This was in Fremont. And then finally there was a shootout with the police. And we did these vigils for her, and we paid for her mother and sister to come here and for the funeral. And you know what somebody said to me? He really loved her. Her name was Rosie, so he had planted lots of rose bushes in the yard. And I have to tell you, I only thought of a really clever response several hours later, but somebody justified her murder, that he loved her. So this is our culture. This is what the movies are telling us. It's okay to be abusive because you love somebody. This is how you show your love, by controlling. Of course, there are people who do it secretly. But the thing is, when you encourage this inequality among girls and boys, when you say you go to your father, when a woman gets married, only your funeral pyre should rise from your husband's home. We have this case where this guy had abandoned her in India for 7 years and then wanted the child. And so he pretended that he wanted her back here, etc. So I asked her, what did your parents say when he showed up after 7 years of not knowing where he was? And her parents said, oh, you're like Sita. Ram has come back. And then they told him, they asked him, what did she do wrong the first time that you threw her out? Tell us so she won't do it again. And then I said to her, your parents didn't throw him out of the house saying, who the hell are you to come back? But this is our cultural ethos. This is the upbringing. And I'm giving you some maybe extreme examples, but this is truly what people think. Ek thappad maar diya, kya farak padta hai? I had to suffer so much in my marriage. Why can't you suck it up? And when you start having such an unequal relationship, a lot of mothers-in-law, women abuse their daughters-in-law. And why? Because that's how they get power, right? So I think when you start really examining this culture, this cultural mores, I think you have the answer there. And then with new technology, cyberbullying, we had this one guy, he put on her phone, he put a mapping device that he could track. So he could see where she was going on, using his phone to see that. And we had another situation where this guy was recording her calls, and which is illegal, of course, but clipping them so that he was stringing them together to make it sound that she really was asking for this. She was married him for a green card. He wasn't abusing her. And then he would put these on WhatsApp groups, family groups, to show everyone that she was the crazy wacko person. So, the sophistication with technology is out there, but it's really horrific. It's really appalling, truly appalling what we will accept and listen. And what I think Shailaja just said, how do we respond when somebody says, I'm being abused? What is our response to them?
Thank you. Thank you for that. And yes, finally, we're getting some good participation over here. So thank you, listeners. I know it's a sensitive topic, so if you don't want to write in, you can definitely also call in to the Radio Zindagi line at 510-657-1170. I'm going to just read a comment from Amitabh Moham. Thank you for that, Amitabh. He's written, domestic violence is now commonly defined broadly to include all acts of physical, sexual, psychological, or economic violence that may be committed by a family member. And he's also written that the psychological impact it has on a victim is a life-changing experience that can never be addressed by the provisions of law and traditional beliefs that where the aggressor may think they have the right to control their partner. So thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying our show. Thank you so much. And yes, Amitabh, we definitely agree with you that there's a lot more domestic violence during this lockdown. And that brings me to my next question. Bindu, how can this community become more involved in helping curb domestic violence, especially now during COVID, when we know, for example, we all have had friends and people that we know are experiencing this or have experienced this, and now they're on lockdown, they're probably in depression or feeling very depressed. What can we do as a community, as a family, to reach out and help people in this particular situation?
Yeah, I would start by saying, to be kind first to yourself and to others, really to understand our worth, understand that we don't in our relationships that we come with worth and we are worthy of love and of respect and to be heard and to be safe. So I think that's important. That's kind of like the rock bottom at which we should kind of operate. But apart from that, I think to be more vigilant, to not really have our heads in the sand and kind of assume that the world around us is doing okay, but really to like look outside our little bubbles and look at what's happening around in the world and understand that all of these things are connected, that it may be your daughter, it may be your neighbor, it may be you. There is no class nobody is exempt from something like domestic violence, and it sometimes is a matter of time. And so just to be a little more aware and stay aware, learn about the issue, understand the complexities of it. This is an extremely complex issue with varying layers, as many people have mentioned. So really understand, like learn, be aware of what's happening, be a better ally and a friend to people. Check in on friends. A lot of people are really going through a lot. It could bring back traumatic memories for a survivor during the lockdown. It may mimic prior lockdowns by the abuser. And so these are moments to really step up as a friend to our friends and to really understand, hey, is there something I can do for you? Can I do something for you rather than tell you what I need you to do? So I think all of that, apart from that, volunteer, speak up about it. It's not the, fun topic that makes us feel good at night, but it is an absolutely important topic we all should be talking about obsessively wherever we can. So learn about it, talk about it, volunteer with a domestic violence nonprofit if you can. There is place for everybody, whether you have a tech background, a marketing background, an advocacy background, no matter who you are, there is space for you in the movement. The violence did not start yesterday, it's not ending tomorrow, and there's place for everybody to be a part of the movement, men, women, children, all of us. So be a part of the movement, donate generously to a nonprofit. All nonprofits are struggling during COVID-19, along with our individuals. So make a donation to a nonprofit of your choice, but really step up, be aware, be vigilant, learn, know your right. Assume that just because we're not talking about it or don't think about things doesn't mean it isn't going to happen. But things as simple as, do you know where your legal documents are? Do you have access to your bank accounts? These are important, pivotal steps to have in your relationships, because it's important to be aware. It's, things may be great forever and things may not, but really to be aware for yourself and for others, and to be a supportive friend. I think all these feel very simple and basic humanity conversations, but all can contribute to really reducing violence and abuse. And maybe the last thing I'll say is acknowledge, I think what we should also spend a lot of time on is acknowledging the power we have. We show up to many places with power. And there are many unequal places. We may be employers, we may be managers, we may be, we may be parents. There are places where we hold higher power than someone else. And it's important to also examine, what do we do when we show up with higher power than someone else? And do we exploit that? And if we do, we are not really different from someone else who is abusing and someone else who is causing violence. So I think to look in the mirror, which is a difficult conversation, and to think about, are we perpetuating abuse of any sort, and what can we do about it?
Absolutely. And I think, again, going back to the point, a lot of people always and only want to associate domestic violence with getting that thappar. And they don't realize that if somebody doesn't give you access to funds, even to be able to go shopping, and you have to answer to every single receipt or every single purchase, that's also a form of abuse. And I think a lot of people only associate, as I mentioned, domestic violence only with the physical, the physical abuse. And so my question next to you, Shailaja, is how do you build confidence in victims? I mean, it's tough. It took me a long time, and I for myself, I found that talking about it, I had become very quiet in the 4 years that I was married, because of course, everybody's concern was, what will people think? Log kya sochenge, right? What will the family think? You shouldn't be discussing washing your dirty laundry in public. For some reason, domestic violence is always labeled as dirty laundry. And it took me a long time to build confidence. And I used being vocal. And even today, as I talk about it, it's therapy after many years when you talk about things. What are your suggestions, Shailaja, as an advocate? How would you build confidence in a victim and tell them, it's okay, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and there is chance maybe of you finding somebody else that could be better? Because a lot of us think, no, this is it. And I'm addressing mainly women, because I'm sure there are men out there get abused, and I don't want this to become a gender issue, but it is primarily, especially in our Desi community, a lot of women who are affected and children.
Yes. So I want to first thank you for saying that it does impact all genders, but it's true that the people we serve primarily are women. If I were to take a step back when I'm thinking about your question on how do we build confidence, I think the first thing to remember is that whatever feels like help is defined by the person who is the survivor. So it is really not what we want to see them do. It is helping them figure out what would they like done in their life. And that can in itself be a huge process, because we are talking about somebody who's used to being controlled and being told what they need to do or think or say. So I think starting from the point of view, from the perspective of you could be the person who first helped somebody realize that that was not normal. Like your role could start from the very first instinct of saying that was not normal, to being the person somebody has shared their confidence with and your first response to them, to being the person who is helping build, because after the first response comes a very long journey of processing, and that's where the confidence building happens. So to remember that healing is not linear. You could be having one conversation one day, but another one another day. And it's not about the person who's helping, but about the person you're helping. So, building the self-esteem would take a lot of listening. Please listen, lean in and listen, make space, be non-judgmental. Our role almost is to unlock processing powers. What is their person's inherent processing power? To unlock it and build it is what we're trying to do. And that can take, for some people, it's 2 weeks. For some people, it's 10 years. There is no time limit on it. So we can't tell a survivor, hey, get up, hurry up. It's already been 3 months. Why are you still talking about it? Why are you still crying about it? Forgive, let go, get over it. All those don't help at all. Don't underestimate the power of getting resources and information to someone, because many times we don't even know that information and help exists. So your role could be to get the information, process it, and then give it when it feels useful, rather than bombarding somebody with it. That is a huge, that's a huge thing that I've seen. So I was often mentioned is the one friend who would break down the pieces, and then the person who would, actually go with them to the appointment, so you don't feel alone. So I think giving space, believing them, telling them repeatedly it's not their fault, helping them get over the internalized negative chatter in their head, and then taking care of yourself. Because if you're a caregiver to a survivor and it's a long journey, you have to take care of yourself in the process. Then you're there much better present for them. So there's no set one way for someone, but I think if we keep some of those non-judgmental, inclusive, and survivor-centric values, I think we can all step up a little bit better.
Thank you. And I think just a reminder to all our listeners is that even when they call into the hotlines for help, they're always confidential. So I think people always worry about the confidentiality.
And there is no expectation that you're going to follow something, you're going to report something. It is whatever you want it to be. Thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely.
Thank you. So my question to you, Kalpana, is from one of our listeners. They've heard of a case where a spouse has fled or threatened to leave the country, taking the kids with them. Is that would that be considered a form of abuse? When you say, if you're going to report me, I'm going to take the kids and disappear on you. Is that another reason where people don't report and they're hesitant to because they think they're going to lose their children?
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, Rennu, and thanks for the caller bringing that up, because definitely I've seen that and heard that a lot in my practice. I think that anytime that people are trying to use things that they have maybe in their power and control is a form of abuse, and emotional abuse is some of the most hard to see, but the most powerful and damaging. Using the legal system to try to get a hand up on somebody else is a form of abuse. And I want people to know that there are protections, again, that somebody doesn't get, you can seek a restraining order from, you can obtain the passports of the children and have that placed in a safe place that's, with sometimes often with an attorney, actually. It can be lodged with an attorney's office, the passports, if it's agreed upon. There's methods to stop them from doing that. And I actually want to say that the Indian consulate here in San Francisco reached out to me several years ago and has been, interested in being able to provide support on the other side when that individual gets to India, and pursue action when they land in India, should they do something like that. And there are international, that's actually a form of trafficking, in fact, or kidnapping. It can fall under different legal categories where you can, whether you have the passport or not, you're still the parent and you have a legal right to your children. And you can't just let them, there are methods to bring them back. It's complicated with India because of some of the Hague Convention rules. We'll say that the Indian consulate here in San Francisco is highly supportive and will, in fact, contact people on the ground in India to even make an arrest in the airport, and they're willing to do that. So
Thank you.
just step back, if you don't mind, but to something that Shailaja said. And, one of the things that by the time somebody visits an attorney, to me, they've already taken a huge step, right? It's a huge leap, and it's a huge leap in confidence. And I try very hard, I don't always do it successfully, but I try very hard to acknowledge that's what they've done, that's something to be acknowledged. It's a huge step that they're trying to take control over their lives. It's a huge step in self-empowerment. And I think to the extent that friends, when somebody reaches out to them and says that this is what happens, you've got to acknowledge, wow, that must have been very hard for you to do that. And I think that's really important with what our role as allies can be in this process. And because I've got clients who've gone way beyond that. I had a client who, after we filed various immigration applications for her, she then decided to tell her story publicly. It was printed in the newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle. And the reason she did it, which I was so admire, was that she said, if just one person could hear my story, they might reach out. And indeed, the very day that her story got published, a woman called me from Baltimore who had seen it. San Francisco Chronicle, and it had come up in Baltimore, and they immediately called me. And I called to tell her that, because that's huge, because I think while we're talking about was like, please step forward, we got to meet them in the middle when they do that.
Absolutely.
It's our responsibility.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe we have a caller. So RJ Ira, you can put the caller through. Let's see if we can hear the caller. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. This is Rennu.
Yeah, Rennu, you're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. If you want to identify yourself, you can. If not, that's no problem. You can remain confidential.
I would like to identify myself.
Yeah, go ahead. Could you speak a little louder, please, for us?
My name is Rennu Dhillon, and I was driving from one place to the other, and I just happened to put on 11:70 a.m. I think this is a great program. It was so interesting that I had to stop the car and really hear what you guys are saying. But I think there are two things here that I'd like to say. One is that, it does not happen to women who really speak the language as much as it's happening to women who are not able to speak English, or they're not able to tell you what is going on, and they're not able to express themselves. So maybe there should be a repeat of this program, maybe in the local language, maybe the Indian Hindi language or Punjabi or whatever, because those are the women who those are the ones who are not telling you what is going on.
Absolutely. I recognize who this is. Rini. Thank you for that, Rini. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It's highly recommended. Maybe our Radio Zindagi can maybe do a transcript, or maybe we do this show with people that can speak in Hindi or another language. Absolutely. Thank you so much for calling and appreciate it. And thank you to all our listeners that are posting messages, enjoying the discussion. Yashika, Shanta, thank you so much. So I have another question, and I will back again to you, Kalpana, on this question as well. When men marry and leave their wives, bring them here and then leave their wives, isn't that punishable? Just bring them from India, use them here as servants, and then abuse them and then leave them. Is that punishable to come and ignore them when they come here, bring them over here?
That's a complicated question. So I think it depends on what we're talking about. So just simply deciding to leave a marriage after it's occurred. I mean, in our family courts, there's no blame that's assigned. It's a little bit of a different system for divorce proceedings. But if you say that they bring them here and then use them for, essentially domestic servitude, right, then there's arguably some laws that are being violated there, sort of labor trafficking laws that are being violated. So potentially, I think you have to look at each situation.
Okay, thank you. So we have about 8 minutes before we wrap up. So this is a good time for us to all start making our closing statements. So since I'm already with you, Kalpana, I'll continue with you in terms of the question and then your closing statement. Do you think dependent visa holders are more prone to being subject to domestic violence? And then your thoughts on domestic violence.
Unlike the other ladies here who deal with this day in and day out, I can't speak to the numbers, but I will say that there are unique challenges to dependent visa holders, and there's constant threats of deportation related to their legal status that is different from a green card holder or a U.S. citizen. Absolutely, I want people to know that there are absolute protections for them. Not just under immigration law, but even under family and criminal law. And one of the things, there's a few things I want to make sure people get to hear, is that, for example, in family court, you can force documents from the abusive spouse directly. You can force documents from their employers, right? So there are methods, legal methods and tools that are available to get the documents. Why are we talking about documents so much? Because documents is the vehicle for control, right? Everybody talks about the undocumented, but that's sort of what ends up happening if you're a dependent spouse and your abuser controls your documents. They essentially make you undocumented. And there are methods for you to gain control over that. There's methods to force the attorney who files those applications to turn over their files. I want people to know that there are protections. Also want to really quickly say that I hope what people will think about is advocate for greater sentences, advocate for women to be protected, advocate for longer restraining orders. That's something we can do now, especially in a time when there is a lot of desire to have social change and changing how crimes are handled. This is an area where I think women and men should be speaking up for greater advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Someone's put a question out. What about cheating partners? Isn't that emotional and mental abuse and the physical problems caused because of the stress? I'll answer that one. No, cheating partners, it causes a lot of emotional and mental stress. But let me tell you, in the courts of law, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, Kalpana, here in California, at least, it's a no-fault state. So you can be cheating with as many people as you like, or your spouse can be doing that. That's not going to be a cause for any case other than simply getting a divorce in your 6 months. But yes, it causes a lot of physical and stress, and highly recommend you just leave that cheating partner. Don't give him another chance or her another chance. Sonia, back to you with your closing statement.
I'm so grateful to everyone having talked about this, and you particularly, Rennu. I really want to encourage the listeners to think about how can we change this dynamic with your children, with your families, with your nephews and your nieces. At Maitri, we have been doing now for the last 3-4 years, we've been doing a very concentrated outreach and prevention program. And we have recorded 22 podcasts dealing with dating violence, dealing with teens talking about how challenged they are with living sort of almost schizophrenically in a mainstream community and going home and being surrounded by are really not even followed back in the home countries. Good parenting practices. And we have an amazing project going on, Men and Boys Speaking Up, which has been going on for the last several years. We are on round number 3. And if you really feel strongly and want to speak up Please join your voice in with all the other men and boys and people speaking up. Let's prevent this. And you could prevent it by responding to those stupid WhatsApp jokes that demean women and say this is not right. Yeah. You can donate, which you can speak up. You can do so many things. Let's stop this and change it, and let's be the change ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And actually, a young gentleman, which maybe Bindu, you can answer in your closing statement. He's posted a question here. What can schools do better to educate kids to become allies and have awareness? So maybe you could answer that in your closing statement.
Absolutely. I think there is a lot that can be done really to understand relationships and what constitutes healthy relationships versus not, and what is coercion versus conflict. There are fine lines here between what is conflict and abuse, and there has to be conversations around it. Definitely. There's a lot of children that are in domestic violence families, and it affects them whether they see the violence and abuse or not. Many people, there is a cycle of violence. Many times someone who's received harm will go on to maybe either harm someone else or also continue to receive harm. So there is a lot of intergenerational abuse and violence, and there's a lot that we can do with our youth within the school systems and otherwise, really to have conversations around this. I think, back to Sonia's point, there is a continuum of violence as well, which means there are small little microaggressions around abuse and violence, and then there is the larger, bigger things that no one questions. And it's important for us to see our part in where we are. Are we doing things to foster more abuse and control and violence in the world, or are we doing, and inaction is not good enough for us, for the 1%, inaction is not good enough. We've done it long enough. It hasn't worked. Life isn't getting any better. It's getting complicated as things go. So inaction is not the answer. You feel like life is being good through COVID-19, do something and step up and support an organization.
Thank you so much. And we have 1 more minute left. So Shylaja, point to you. And definitely, as I will comment and say, leadership really helps. And we lack leadership. We don't have a leader that respects women right now in this country. So all the more important for us to educate our children on that. So Shylaja, over to you for your closing statement.
Well, if it's a 1 minute closing statement, I'm going to just paraphrase a book I love, that Women Hold Up Half the Sky. I'm going to say women only hold up half the sky. A lot of the emotional labor right now is being done by the survivors to overcome the systems, change the system. So I'm going to piggyback off the young man who was asking us a question and say, yes, the other 50% has to step up. And we have the power to break the generational cycle of trauma. Like, we have so much power. The one thing, if we can stop today, is to stop worrying if we are overreacting. If you see a red flag, believe it, trust it, talk about it. At the most, you would be wrong, but there is a high chance you'll be right. So if we can all just lose that one fear of overreacting to an unhealthy situation when we see it, I think we'll see a big movement in us all speaking up a little bit more confidently. So
thank you so much. And it's time to wrap up our show. And for all our listeners, if you want to reach out, you need any help, we have Sonia from Maitri, we have Bindu from Narika, we have Shailaja from SAVE, and then of course we have Kalpana Peddibhotla, who is an immigration attorney. You can Google all of them and you can look them up. And remember, you can make a difference even if it's in the life of one child and one person. So do it. And again, thank you, ladies, and thank you, Rages in the Gear, again for an amazing 1 hour. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank